for joining. Just the button. So you've got a fantastic program ahead of you, digging into the details of resilience. My job today is to try and give you a bit of the general overview of what, most particularly why, and a little bit of the how, and then across the course of your awesome program, you'd be able to dig more into the how. So this presentation is all about the art of being ready for anything. This is one of our beautiful New Zealand mountains in the backdrop, but with the storm clouds on the horizon, which pretty much sums up the world today, is that there's a lot of storm clouds. So let's dive into the art of being ready for anything at all. What's the anything? Well, we don't have a crystal ball. We really can't predict the future. So when we talk about being ready for anything, I mean for anything. And I'm sure the world's got a few more interesting things to throw at us. We've had a pandemic. Suddenly resilience is actually on everybody's horizon. It suddenly seems relevant to them. But it's also a very overused word. It means a lot of different things, and I'm going to dig into what we specifically mean when we think about resilient organisations. Start with the thought. It's about having your organisation ready for anything. Why do we need to be ready for anything? Well, firstly, because the world that we're living in today is what's called a VUCA. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. This acronym became common in the Western world back in 2001. Rolls off the tongue easily. It's a VUCA world to describe the turbulent, the rapidly changing environment that is the normal that we now live in. So volatility is about the speed of change in an industry, in a market, in a country, or in the world in general. The more volatile the world, the more and faster things change. New innovations are sparked by digital technology. More and more our organisations, whether we are for profit, not for profit, or in government, our organisations have got to be ready to react quickly when things change. Sorry, wrong buttons. There we go. The world is also uncertain. So the extent to which we think we can confidently predict the future is not there anymore. Not a lot of people predicted Brexit, Trump, the wave of terrorism, war in Russia, very Western-centric, focused on the world, I'm afraid, as well. But I think that uncertainty goes into all continents. Complexity is about the more things that we need to know or be aware of. The very fact that we are sitting in how many different countries? 9, 10, at all different times of the world, and we're managing to connect on this platform. But that speaks to the complexity of all of the connections between things. We need to have systems thinking to operate in that environment. And finally, the world's become a bit more ambiguous. There's fuzziness or vagueness in ideas and in terminology. Now that environment creates a lot of risk. It also creates a lot of opportunity, and particularly for the not-for-profit sector as well as for others. The other reason why we need to be ready for anything is the increasing frequency and intensity of natural hazard events, from storms to droughts and fires, all of which, of course, are going to be intensified if they haven't already been, by climate change. And then the less likely but high impact earthquakes, volcanoes, tornadoes. So I'm based in New Zealand. It's second in the world after Bangladesh for natural hazard risk. So we're very mindful of that here. Obviously, it's a pretty good environment in which to study organisational resilience. Our organisations have a lot they have to deal with. Even countries that are less accustomed to sudden onset disasters are starting to see floods and droughts and landslides resulting from climate change. So increasingly, even those countries not particularly exposed to natural hazards may become so. So it's a scary old world that we live in. What do we do about it? I want you to think about it like this. Your organisation is your baby. Now, if you have a baby, those of you who are parents, you might get a health check, you might get vaccinations, you make sure it can't fall down the stairs if you live in a 2-story residence. You'll want to create opportunities for it to learn, for it to have fun, for it to grow. Protecting your organisation, building resilience, it's the same. It's a series of small activities over time, just like you put in as a parent, but that grow a robust organisation. Now, most of you aren't in this for the money, for the power, for the glory. You're in this because you love what you do. You love the organisations that you work in and that you're helping to build, in the same way that you love a family member. You take these little steps to make sure it's going to be as okay as you can. So it's a challenging and volatile world. It's got a lot of threats. You need to protect and nurture your organisation to make sure that you can still achieve your objectives. What we do to achieve that is we take the small steps that build your organisation's resilience. So we define resilience as the ability to survive a crisis and thrive in a world of uncertainty. There's sort of 2 parts to that. You've got to be able to survive and get through, as we've all just come through, or still in many cases working through a global pandemic. But you also want to not just survive, you want to do better than that. You want to thrive in this volatile world of uncertainty that we live in. It's not as hard as you might think. You're probably already doing lots of activities that are making you resilient in some ways. You never get resilient. It's never done. It's not like a magic, yep, finished, move on to the next thing. It's a series of underlying things that need to underpin your activities. Sorry, do excuse me. I've got a slight cold. It's a cough that creeps in. Okay. So there's lots of different types of resilience. I said at the start that resilience is a bit of an overused word. We throw it around quite casually. It's quite important to remember that resilience exists at lots of different levels. Of course, our focus here is on organisational. There is a thing, of course, called individual resilience, but it's important to remember that organisational resilience is not just a sum of resilient individuals, nor, of course, are they totally unrelated to each other. An organisation's resilience is impacted by the people within it, but also by the organisation's systems, its norms, how we do things around here, its structures, its processes, and its context. So that's, of course, 6 different things that impact on it, not just the individuals within it. So when people are having conversations about resilience, it's usually quite useful to just pause for a moment and think about the resilience of what and to what, to make sure that you're actually all on the same page about what's being talked about. If you go and pitch an idea to a funder or to a boss about we want to build resilience, in some places they're probably going to think that you want to do something to make your people stronger rather than your organisation. So important to focus on which bit of resilience are we talking about. So obviously we're focused on organisational resilience. I'm hoping by now that you think that sounds pretty good. What do I do? Where do I go to get it? Unfortunately, of course, that's the bit where the presentation gets out, but has to go into the detail part because it's not quite that simple. I do hope that many of you will realise by the end of this presentation that you're already taking lots of actions that do help your organisation to be resilient. So what actually is this thing called resilience? Okay. We divide it up into 3 areas that I'm going to talk through. At the top of this pyramid here is the leadership and culture. Leadership and culture sets the tone, makes the rest of things happen. So leadership and culture is a really important part of resilience. Networks and relationships. So who your organisation connects with and how it connects internally itself. Next key part of resilience. And change ready, indicating how ready you are to have to react, to have to change quickly, to be keeping up with everything that is going on. You'll start to see why I say you're doing things in this area already when you realise that the secret sauce, the recipe for resilience, is a lot about soft culture actions, not just actual plans, money in the bank, etc. Behind that idea of dividing it into sort of 3 boxes, there's a whole lot of more boxes, okay. 13 of them to be precise. They're what we call the indicators of resilience. So in this grossly oversimplified view of your organisation, we'd be looking at how you do in these 13 areas. And I'm not going to talk you through every single one of those because it would bore you to tears. But looking through the program that you've got in front of you over the course of the week, you'll be touching upon almost every one of those across that program. I'm going to give you an overview. A slightly simpler way of looking at what is resilience is this graph. What this is telling us is that resilience comes from planned component and from an adaptive component. So this is based on a lot of research into actual organisations encountering some kind of crisis or challenge and looking at these organisations in detail, doing what we call case studies and understanding that it's a combination of this planning and this adaptive capacity that gets organisations through. So planning is about how you think and prepare. You're here, you've come to the seminar about resilience, so that's part of planning. Your planning includes how it enables your organisation to adapt as well. And adapting is about what you do when the crisis hits. But of course, it's strongly influenced by the systems, the norms and the processes that exist now in your organisation and whether they enable you to adapt. And don't worry, I'm going to dig into that one in a wee bit more detail. But we're going to start by having a look at planning first. And hopefully this is the point where you go, oh, okay, it's that simple. I'm going to focus on just a few of the basics in planning, looking at IT and records, looking at how you plan for people, and looking at what plans you have. So what I really, really want to encourage you to do is make sure you are not like this man. This man is standing in the rubble of an earthquake. The shaking only finished a couple of minutes ago. Anyone familiar with earthquakes will know that there's a constant series of aftershocks going on. You'll see 3 people just stunned looking around. But his priority was he had to take those computers with him in that environment. Now, this is back in 2011, just when cloud computing was taking off. But obviously he didn't think he had backups at home. So most of us rely on digital devices these days, even if it is just your phone. But of course, your phone and your computer, so many things that can go wrong with them. So if you're not in the cloud, that's okay. I mean, there's reasons to be in it, reasons not to be in it. Sorry, dog, I'm at home barking in the background. Okay, if you're not, if all of your records are not in the cloud, then you need to make sure that you're taking a copy of all your key records. You just need a big USB stick or a big, portable hard drive. You need to make sure it's stored somewhere else, not in the same bag that you're carrying your laptop around in or right beside your computer if you've got a desktop computer somewhere. And you just need to copy everything regularly onto it. You need to be careful to make sure that you do get everything. Think about all the phone numbers and contacts. Everything is what you might need if both your phone and computer got stolen at the same time. You also need to remember paper records. If you still have anything important that is on paper, you want to have a copy or at least a photo, at least, incorporate the digital and take photos of a bare basic. There's a lot of people out there who still have their how to do things written down on a piece of paper. And they're vitally important, right? Your sort of how-to manuals. Those kind of things need to be incorporated in this record keeping as well. This is what we call the basics, but I can tell you some terrible stories about organisations who've almost ceased to exist because they've lost all of their records. And this, in a couple of cases, was particularly contacts. So they lost their ability to go out and market and fundraise their activities, and that almost costs them existing. So the second basic is people, and you've got a highly choreographed team of people there working together. The key for you is, do you have multiple people who can do the key tasks? In this setup, any one of those people can sub in. They can move one to the left and do the next person's job. Do you? What would happen if you or another key person in your organisation was in a coma for months? You're going to recover fully, be healthy again, but 2 months in a hospital, completely unconscious. Is your organisation going to be easily able to survive that? So there's lots of ways to address key person dependencies, and the pandemic has taught a lot of organisations a lot in this area. You can have someone shadow you when you're doing key tasks that only you know how to do. Or you can write down some basic instructions. You can password protect that document with access only to a selected few. It's you kind of open this book in an emergency. Often the things that are in that kind of the book are a whole lot of passwords for particular things. It might be how the payroll is done, fairly important. Some of those really key things that need to be done on a particular schedule. But this one's not really hard to go back and just think about, what do you do that only you know how to do, and make sure that that doesn't continue that way. And lastly, on what I described as the planning basics. So you need to have plans in place for what to do when things are bad. These are not prescriptive plans. A plan is your starting point. This image deliberately is a flexible, can't remember what it's called, flexible plans that just serve as a starting point for any emergency. So your starting point here might be to think, what are the obvious hazards that your organisation faces? Now, probably common across the board will be a lack of funding, and we're going to address that one later on down the track. So when we're thinking hazards, I'm thinking, are you in a flood area? Are you in a landslide area? Do you have a high fire risk? Those kind of obvious ones where you ought to have an immediate response plan to keep your people safe from those, particularly if they're working out in remote places. Those immediate response plans need to also remember things these days like cyber. Most of you have websites. Do multiple people know how to take your website offline if a hacker puts fake content onto it? How do you respond to that? After those, then you start to think about, what are your plans to keep your assets safe? These plans might just be one-page documents. I'm not sending you off to write novels. They're not big and long. The reason we need to write them down is because they need to be shared with all or some of your team, not just yourselves. But they're not meant to be really complicated. It's the process of thinking about what should be in the plan that's actually the really important part. The writing it down is a way to share it with other people. Hey, so this session wasn't going to all just be about me talking and you listening. It's about you adding some things to your to-do lists, hopefully. So here's your first action list, all about planning. Take care of the basics. Don't let a spilled cup of coffee over a computer become a crisis. Think about your people dependencies. Start with yourself. If you were out of action for 3 months, what needs to be done by who? What can you do over the next 6 months to make sure that is possible? And think about, what plans should your organisation have? What's your plan to keep your people safe if a fire or a flood or a storm impacts you? And then think about your organisation's assets. What's your plan to protect your organisation's assets? Okay, so that was all about planned resilience. Now I'm going to move on to that adaptive resilience, the ability of your organisation to adapt. And I'm going to touch upon leadership and culture, networks and relationships, and change readiness. So networks and relationships is all about, firstly, effective partnerships externally with other organisations, being part of this network, for example. It's about what we call leveraging knowledge, which is part of that. Can anybody access what they need to know to make sure organisations carry on? Would the loss of one or two key staff members in a car crash, mean the end of your organisation? Hopefully not. Breaking silos. If you're one of the larger organisations here, do you all talk to each other? Does the left hand of the organisation know what the right hand is actually doing? Do they agree with it? Do they share? And then lastly, it's about internal resources and making sure that your organisation has enough people to get things done. Because the answer to that is there's never enough. There's always a desire for more. But the saying in the resilience world is that if you have too few people and you're always expecting 130% from them, they've got nothing left to give to you when there actually is some kind of crisis or disaster. They're already tired out and burnt out. So best practice is actually always to have people just that tiny little bit under full of work. Hey, because they're the people who've got the time to go and build networks and relationships, to learn and to grow, and they've got that little bit left in the tank for when things go bad and people need to step up and do more. In your world, every bit of information you can get about the funding landscape, what's changing, who's won what grants, all helps your situational awareness to ward off the next crisis coming from a funding direction, or gives you avenues to seek help and share problems when you're in crisis. Networks and relationships really do help organisations get through. You need to build them before you're in a crisis, but you can also try and reach out once you're in a crisis as well. Great solutions come from people talking about their problems and issues to other people. We tend to think of the world as a competitive place. Maybe I'm an optimist, but in my experience, people do want to help others who are in a crisis, even in the world of for-profit business, certainly here in New Zealand. When we have major disasters that are impacting whole regions, people come together. They want everybody to do okay. But if you sit in your office or in your home and kind of go, oh, no, we've got no money and I don't know what to do and I don't want to talk to anybody about it, that's a recipe for your own, that's not good for your own well-being, and it's not likely to help your organisation. I know that sometimes showing vulnerability can be challenging, to pick up the phone and say we're in trouble, but that's where great ideas about solutions to problems come from. So I can't emphasise enough how important it is that you do actively work to build your networks and build relationships and work with people in a way that leaves them wanting to help you if you are in a crisis. Equally important is that it's not just you, it's not just any one person within an organisation. It's all of your employees, all of your volunteers, all of the key people involved. If you're just one dot in this picture, think how much power comes from leveraging all of those dots and all of those connections that we have. Remember back to me suggesting that you might think of your organisation as being like your baby. We know it takes a village to raise a baby. You've got to get out there and connect with that village. Okay, let's have a wee moment to think, how are you guys doing in this space? So I'm just in a moment going to launch a poll. I can just make my mouse behave itself. Jeepers. Hold on a second. There you go. Let's see if we're all awake out there. There we go. So do you actively build relationships with others you might have to work with in a crisis? You should on screen be able to answer that one. Now remember, this is anonymous, so you can be entirely honest. a couple more seconds. 2, 3. Okay, and we'll stop that one and let's see how we do. Okay, so hopefully you should be seeing the results. Laura, is that a thumbs up? Are we seeing the results?
Well, I've got access like you, Tracy. So, Chloe, are we seeing results?
Okay, anyone out there give me a can you see the results of the
Please
poll?
start the results, yes.
Yes, awesome. Thank you very much.
Annette, would you be kind enough to read results? Oh, yeah.
Awesome, so sorry.
Sorry, are you asking me to read out the results? Is that to me?
No, just wanted to check that you can see them. All good. Thank you very much. I'll carry on. This is both the joy of this amazing world, right, that we can all connect internationally across time zones and countries. But oh gosh, don't we all hate Zoom sometimes? Okay, so hey, it's awesome. Networks and relationships, I've just said I can't emphasize enough how important these are. And many of you are doing plenty in this space, which is fantastic. I've got a lot of oftens. So for the sometimes and the occasionallys, I'd like the takeaway to be that I know there's never enough time to do everything that you want to do and need to do. But do remember that this isn't a nice to have to build those networks and relationships. It really is a must have. You just never quite know when they're going to prove useful to you. They are hopefully useful even in normal times as a source of situational awareness about what is going on in your landscape. Awesome. Okay, we've got a couple more of those polls coming up. We'll stop that one for now and keep moving forwards. Okay, yeah. Okay, so leadership and culture also really key contributors to resilience. I'm going to dig into leadership a little more, so I'll come back to that one. Leadership's about staff engagement. Leadership and culture area is also about staff engagement. Do your staff understand how their work contributes to the organisation? Are they excited to work for the organisation? Would they work extra if they need it in a crisis? Does your leadership treat them in a way that encourages them to feel like that about the organisation? Situational awareness, you can see the links to networks there. Do you stay alert to what is going on? Do people share news about what's going on, including early warning signals of change in the environment that leadership need to be aware of? Decision making is our next indicator there, and that is about whether staff are able to make decisions related to their work. Decision making, giving staff the ability to make decisions within appropriate boundaries, is a key factor also involved in engagement. When something goes wrong for your organisation, certainly if it's the natural disaster kind of environment, there are a lot of decisions that need to be made very quickly. If you have a culture where decisions must climb their way very slowly up the chain before a decision can be made, you'll find it very difficult to adapt in the circumstances where fast change is needed. And lastly in this area is innovation and creativity. In this volatile and uncertain and ambiguous world, we need to innovate. We need to be creative. We need to reward people for coming up with ideas and developing solutions rather than presenting problems. To enable people to be innovative and creative, we have to make sure they're not always stretched working at 130%. Busy people don't innovate. We also need to make sure that we are receptive to the ideas that they create. If they've come 10 times with an idea and we've always told them that's not a very good idea, they will stop coming. And you never know, the 11th idea might just be the gem that really takes your organisation to a new level. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that top one there, leadership. It's a big area, leadership, right? But there's a few key areas that we can zoom down into that build resilience. There's a picture of bees on here for a reason. which is leadership for resilience, is actually about swarm leadership. So ideas, action, and information are generated by multiple people, and multiple people are empowered to make decisions to advance the organisation. That may include staff and volunteers, because they're so engaged in what the organisation is doing, they fully embrace it and want to really help. So leadership for resilience is about harnessing the power of the collective, creating a much messier picture than your typical organisation chart with a command and control mode and straight lines down the page. If that all sounds a bit too hard, it's not something you change tomorrow. If you want to think about how you do this, then consider, do you have all the ideas, or do you build your team's capabilities to generate them? Does your team come to you just with problems for you to solve, or with solutions as well? Do you ask them to consider and come up with solutions? So even if this isn't how you operate currently, you can change this, but you have to persevere and take time to do so. If your organisation has never generally allowed for others to innovate, that's the job of management. So if you've never allowed that and invited them to suggest ideas, people aren't going to suddenly start doing it the first time you ask. If you want everybody to be alert for threats and for opportunities for your organisation, you've got to be careful about how you receive them when they share them with you. You've got to be thankful. You've got to encourage people to start changing that behaviour and contributing. This has multiple benefits, of course. So I've broken resilience down into all these tiny little chunks, but I hope you can see how they all relate to each other as well. The way that your leadership is done has to be suitable for your context and your culture. The key, though, is about involving multiple people. There's plenty of research out there from multiple, across cultures, across countries, that command and control mode isn't going to get your organisation through. Okay, so let's see how you guys do in this space. I'm going to launch another poll. Sorry, I'm just having some difficulties with, there we go, the mouse. Okay, so 3 questions for you this time. You can just use your scroll button to go from 1 to 3. And away you go. Let's see how you guys are doing in this space. Remember, it's entirely anonymous, so be as honest as you can. Okay, just 30 seconds more. Super. I'm going to end that poll now and show the results. Okay, so all share ideas freely. We've got a bit of a spread there. Fantastic to see quite a few people up there in the often and always. Hey, that's absolutely fantastic. So you're well on the way to this thing called resilience, right? Well done. Never, none at all. So actually that's a first. I work with a lot of local government organisations, government not always known for great culture. So if you're in that occasionally or sometimes, just to note that this is a resilience factor. It's a very important one. And if there's anything that can be done to just to tweak and just to move that culture towards one where those ideas are freely shared, that can really make a big difference. Decisions can be made quickly. Yeah, quite a nice big spread there. That's the nature of how we organise ourselves a lot of the time, right? We make these strict hierarchical trees without thinking about how disempowering people makes them feel. And also making a clear calculation about the risk of trusting people. Sometimes we have to take a leap of faith and trust with some boundaries. So definitely would encourage you to think about how we can move some of those never and occasionallys towards the sometimes. And innovation is encouraged. Hey, fantastic. I guess it's partly the space that that you live in, right? Of you've got to be nimble. You've got to manage to do more with less. But actually, decisions can help with that nimbleness as well. So they can help with the innovation. Let's give something new a go. So hey, look, well done, everyone. There's obviously, I said that you'd already be doing some things that help you with your resilience. You clearly are. There's always more to do. That's the nature, but that's okay. All right, so okay, not too much more to go. Our last area of resilience is about change readiness. I'm going to tell you a bit more about unity of purpose in a moment. So just a quick overview of proactive posture. Are you ready to respond to early warning signals of change? Or is that slow decision making you too slow to go, hold on, there might be something coming our way. We might need to do something about it. Planning strategies, we've covered about you need to have a certain level of plans, not detailed, not prescriptive, but plans for how you manage risks and vulnerabilities in your organisation. And then lastly, and this is kind of really in the advanced category, is actually stress testing your plans. In the same way that many of you might have at some point in your life practiced a fire evacuation or some kind of storm drill, the key plans for your organisation ideally need testing. I've heard plenty of stories during the pandemic of plenty of organisations whose plans said we can work from home if we lose our office building or something of the like. Many, many stories as well of organisations that had never tested that plan and found many, many reasons why it would not work. That they're genuinely relating to their IT networks not managing to cope with a load coming in externally. Okay. One of the key things about being change ready is unity of purpose, is ensuring that your organisation has a clear purpose. What's the point of it? What does it do? Does everyone understand and buy into what that purpose is? Is your purpose too vague or too specific? Is it an enabler or a straitjacket? Is it about what you do or what you want to achieve? Because if you want to be around for the long term, then your purpose needs to be adaptable. Here in New Zealand, we have these now shrinking glaciers. So if you're a glacier tourist operator that says we provide glacier tours, you're not going to be around for too much longer because the glaciers won't be. If your purpose is to provide unique visitor experiences that celebrate the best of New Zealand's natural environment, then you're ready to adapt when that glacier is gone. Hopefully that makes sense. I hate Zoom. So I want a room full of either nodding or shaking heads at this point to see if that in any way makes sense. Let's ask you a question and see if that makes sense. How do you think about your organisation and its purpose? Does it have a clear purpose that enables rapid adaptation? Yes, no, or maybe this one is. Okay, just a couple more seconds. Awesome, we'll stop that one there. Let's show everyone how we did. Hey, pretty good. So, of course, oh, sorry, press the right button, share the results. Very impressive. 33% clear yeses. Fantastic. And a no. Okay, so something to maybe take away and consider. And maybe same again, is it possible that just small tweaks could make sure you are achieving that long term? Okay. And sorry, always a delay at this point while I fight to get my mouse back on the right screen. Successfully. Go. My apologies. Okay, so drawing to a close, your takeaways that I'd like you to take away and think about turning into action. To build resilience, you need to work on, not in your organisation. That can be very hard to do. You need to be able to take a step back, look down at the balcony and work on rather than just in the day-to-day that needs doing. Think about drawing in help here too, mentors, supporters, funders. Turn any vicious cycle for your organisation into a virtuous one by being able to step out and work on it rather than in it. Take care of those basics. Make sure that losing a computer isn't going to put you out of action. Make sure that your being out of action can't put your organisation out of action. Train and empower your team, or make sure that key how-to stuff is written down where other people can access it. And last but definitely not least, keep building those relationships. Thank you very much for having me. My very final point is to keep up the great work that you're doing, but also remember to look after yourselves. It's a tough world out there at the moment. It's a really challenging funding landscape. It's a challenging world, full stop. Don't forget to look after yourselves so that you can keep looking after your organisations. Thanks very much for having me. We do have time, hopefully, for questions.